welcome to the Fearless Money Management Podcast, where we empower women to take control of their finances. I'm your host, Claire Strong, and today we're chatting with finance expert and certified CPA, Lisa Risser, on how to start your emergency savings fund. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Claire. How are you?
I am doing good, just juggling all the balls as us women tend to do, but everything's good. Yeah, how about you?
Pretty good. Juggling quite a few things myself, as we naturally do.
I know. Hey, you've got some exciting travel, haven't you, with one of your sons? You're going over to Europe.
I am. My youngest son is doing a study abroad in Denmark. And so I'm going to leave in a few days and go visit him and see him and spend a little time. So I'm looking forward to it. I've never been to Denmark before.
Oh, wow. How exciting. So I haven't done Denmark before. I've done Finland, which is kind of similar. But yeah, that's going to be such an experience for you. I love that for you, that you're at the time in your life now where you have the financial freedom, that you can go and travel and experience things with your sons. And yeah, I love that. You're my hero. I've said that, audience, I've said this to Lisa before, she's like, I'm going to get a t-shirt that says, be more Lisa. So Lisa is who I want to be when I grow up. Which leads us nicely, Lisa, to today's topic. Now, in our previous episode, I don't know whether our audience have listened to that yet, but that was about why it's so important to start an emergency savings fund. This episode, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit about how to even start it in the first place. So, Lisa, how do we start an emergency savings fund?
Well, the first place to start with an emergency savings fund is to actually start with your budget. And we did do a few podcasts, if you haven't seen them already, about how to start a budget, how to put a budget together, and so forth. So if you need some help with that, you can always go back to those podcasts. But the first piece is to have a budget. Once you have a budget, you want to review it, and you want to identify areas in your budget that maybe you could cut back on your expenses a little bit so that you can start to save for your emergency fund if you don't have one already. And that could be, maybe reducing the amount of time that maybe you go out to eat. It could be those daily lattes. It could be maybe reduce your entertainment expenses a little bit, do things a little differently, maybe have people over, friends go to friends' homes instead of maybe going out other places, those kinds of things, so that way you can have some money that you're able to start to save out of every paycheck to go towards your emergency fund. So that's the first step.
That's the first step. So working out, it's funny because all of this comes back to budgeting, doesn't it? That word, over and over again in our conversations. So budgeting really is a foundation to all of this. Note to self, Claire, budgeting. Okay, good. So what I want to know is, though, so this emergency savings fund thing, I know we have to have it. And in our previous episode, we went over all the reasons like why it's so important, including things like, just for our mental sanity, having that, cushion for something that goes wrong. So in that, stressful moment, we don't have the added stress of, oh my gosh, I can't afford to pay for that thing, whatever it may be. But what if I don't have a lot of money to set aside? Is it even worth me starting an emergency savings fund?
Even if you only can find a little bit out of every paycheck for an emergency fund, every little bit helps. And one of the things that we mentioned in our last podcast is about a third of Americans can afford a $400 unexpected expense. And that's pretty staggering.
Scary.
And almost 60% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 unexpected expense. And it's really shocking how big of an issue this is for so many Americans. And it can seem insurmountable, but it's really, rather than focusing on this is so much and I'll never get there, just focus on, again, going to that budget, looking at your expenses, what are your, absolute expenses, and what are the things that you can cut back a little bit on so that you can take that amount and put that towards your emergency savings. And even a little bit builds up over time. And after a period of time, you'll end up with more than you really realize. But the big piece is to get started, even if it's not that much. And as you identify, maybe now you can add a little bit more to that out of every paycheck and so forth. And just keep building and building on that because it doesn't take much to really make a difference in case of an emergency.
So a little bit is better than nothing, which I like the sound of that. But what about a timeline? I mean, should we be saving something every week or every time we get paid? I mean, like, what is the frequency of savings? How should that ideally look like?
Well, the most successful way for people to save is to save in ways that makes it as easy to do it as possible and without thinking about it. And so if you set up so if you take every paycheck, if you get paid every week or every other week or whatever that might be, and you set up an automatic transfer, let's say it's, $20 or $50 out of every paycheck, but you have it automatically transferred that amount every time you get paid into another account, into your emergency fund. That way you don't have to think about it. And for people who have, through your work, if you have retirement accounts and you put into your retirement account through work, it automatically gets deducted from your paycheck and you never see that money. And if you don't see it, then you don't realize that it's there, and you won't probably be, maybe feeling as much like you might use that money for something else, like, oh, I want to do a trip and I want to use my emergency savings for this, this trip that I want to take. If you have it out of sight and out of mind, and it's just an automatic thing that happens, it makes it much easier for you to, save and have that happens because you're not thinking about it. And then 2, to hopefully that you only touch it when it really is an emergency and not just because you want to buy something new.
Okay, so to make it simple for us, if we have it automatically leaving our account every week or every 2 weeks or however, often we get paid, for example, then we don't need to think about it. So I like that. So basically make it easy on ourselves by having it automatically leaving our accounts. And I guess you can't touch it then as well. Okay, but where do we keep this emergency savings fund? Is it in a regular savings account, or where should it be?
Well, the last place you want to put it actually is in a regular savings account, because you're not getting any earnings off of it. You're not getting any investment earnings off of it. And over time, because of inflation, that dollar that you have in a regular savings account is worth less than $1 because of inflation over time. So you want something that's going to have, that you're going to earn some interest in. And hopefully, plus an emergency fund is something that hopefully you have long term, because hopefully you're not having emergencies happening all the time. So it's money that should be there, and accumulating over a period of time, and you only touch it in an absolute emergency. And so you want to be earning some investment income off of that. Now, if you're really conservative, you can put it in a high yield savings account. So you can talk to your bank about a high yield savings account, and that gives you higher interest on it that you'll receive than a regular savings account. You can also do a money market account, and that will be even better for you if you have it in a money market account. There's a little bit more risk associated with it, but the investment income that you can receive on that will be higher, especially over time, over a longer period of time. And what you don't want to do is tie it to any long-term investments. Like if you don't want to put it into a CD, for example, those are long-term investments that you have to hold for a minimum of a year. And because if you have an emergency, you can't say, okay, well, now I got to wait for a year. Or to put it in a retirement account, because if you're if otherwise, if you, first of all, it's difficult to take that money out. And depending upon your age, you might have penalties that are pretty significant by pulling any money out of a retirement account. So you don't want to put it in long-term investments. You want it to be something that you can easily take the cash out in case of emergency, but you also want to have some earnings off of it. So you don't want it in your average savings account or your checking account. You want it in something that's going to actually earn a little bit of investment income for you, and that you just keep building it up over time. But when there's emergency, if something happens, you can easily access it.
Okay, so some of these accounts, is there like a minimum deposit that we have to put in there? Is there a minimum amount that we need to get started with?
Well, if you're talking about a high yield savings account, different banks will have different minimums, but I think they're fairly low for a lot of high yield savings accounts. Money market accounts, a lot of them, if you have an automated savings, I don't think that the minimums are really that high for a money market account. They like it to have an automatic transfer so that, again, out of every paycheck, it automatically has the same amount that goes into that. The other piece in terms of really saving for an emergency fund is another good thing to do if you're really behind on your emergency fund and really getting that up and going. If you get any sort of additional income, maybe you get a bonus, or if you get a promotion and you have an increase in pay, or maybe you have a side gig, you're making a little extra money, take that a little extra and put it into your emergency fund and get that fund growing at a faster rate too. But a lot of these, you don't have to have a lot of money in them in order to get started with them. And it's just important to have something that's set aside that you can access easily and quickly if needed for an emergency.
So this says we're talking specifically about emergency savings here, but is this in addition to a regular savings account? And if so, like what's the difference? Like what would a regular savings? So, do you know what I'm getting at? So could you basically have two running alongside each other? So one that's like an emergency and one that's savings, but maybe not an emergency, like you're saving for a holiday or something like that.
For most people, when we mix those funds together, how much do you know that's really emergency versus savings? So it's really nice to have a separate emergency fund and to know that that's only for emergencies. When you combine it with a regular savings account that you might have, the problem is you're saving for a trip or something. It's hard to track then how much in the savings is for fun things that you want to do or things you're saving for routinely versus the emergency fund. And it's easy then that emergency fund starts getting spent on entertainment or, even if you're saving for a car, whatever it might be that you're saving for, you end up spending more on that. And that's a lot more fun to spend money on all those things too. So emergency fund is not fun. And so when you mix them, it makes it much more difficult to keep track of the emergency fund amount and to keep growing that piece of it. So I recommend that you have it be separate unless you are, one of those rare people that can really track this well and really will make sure that you never tap into that emergency fund amount. And I think that that's a small percentage of people that really follow it that closely.
The emergency savings fund is like it's proper adulting. That's the adult account.
Yes.
It's the mature thing to do. You're really smashing it as an adult if you can pull that one off. Okay, good. So I've got some goals to work towards here. Excellent. Not there yet, but I have goals. Okay, so another thing I want to know then is what ratio, for example, say I wanted a savings account that's going to pay for things like a holiday, but then I need to be also stashing money aside for this emergency savings fund. So what ratio should I be thinking about when it comes to the amount that I put into the emergency savings fund?
Well, if you look overall at your expenses and you've done your budget, you know your expenses, kind of the rule of thumb is about 50% of your expenses should be for your must-dos, right? You got to pay your rent or your mortgage and things like that. Those must-dos. 30% is on other areas like, you know, your food and transportation and your everyday living, entertainment, those kinds of things. Usually about 30%. 20% is what you want to have for savings, for your emergency fund and for other savings. Could be retirement, saving for a trip, or buying a car, those kinds of things. So 20% overall for savings. That's really the goal, the ratio that you want to be at. And if you're not at that ratio, you can just start working towards that ratio a little bit at a time. Take a look again at your budget and your expenses and see if there's some things that you can do to reduce them somewhat. And then with that 20%, then determine how much of it can go to savings, regular savings versus your emergency fund.
Yeah.
If you are starting out and you don't have any emergency funds, my recommendation would be that 20% of savings, try to put as much as you possibly can into the emergency fund until you get it to a certain minimum level. Because when you need it, it's not the time to say, oh, I wish I had that fund. When you need it, you usually need it in a very short term. That's why it's an emergency fund. And so if you don't have an emergency fund, you're getting started, try to get as much of that savings percentage that you have that you can save and set aside for one purpose or another to put that into your emergency fund. And as you grow that, then you can start moving more of that 20% of your for savings into other types of savings.
Is there a general goal that all of us should be aspiring to as it relates to the emergency savings fund? Is there like an amount that we should be striving to have before we either, turn our attention to something else, or, I'm just thinking, is it 10,000, or is there an amount that you would suggest that everyone has in that emergency savings fund?
It should be, the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses. And when we talk about an emergency situation, we're talking about your living expenses, rent, mortgage, utilities, your basic groceries, the gas, just what you have, the expenses you have to live. If you're in an emergency situation, you're probably not going to take that trip. You're probably not, you don't have to do the entertainment and other things like that. So you're just talking about those types of expenses. Now, whether it's 3 months to 6 months, that range, how much you need to have within that range really varies according to your particular situation. So, for example, if you have a job or your spouse has a job that is a little bit rocky, or maybe you're in an industry where there are typical layoffs. There are certain industries and certain companies that have layoffs regularly. Or you're just in the kind of field of job that just naturally goes through potential job loss or reduction of hours. Then you probably need to be closer to the 6 months.
Maybe you're self-employed. Yeah, maybe you're self-employed. I mean, a lot of people are. Yeah, especially mums. I mean, I fall into that category too. I used to work for the BBC, a very stable job because I'm a journalist. And then latterly, I have, branched out on my own, which has its advantages, but then also it has its disadvantages because there are periods where you may not be as busy. And so I guess, there are many people in that situation, especially mums, because quite often we need to fit in a career around the family life because invariably it falls onto us. And so because of that, I think women and mums in particular are especially vulnerable to those uncertain circumstances. And so it's almost more important for us then to have this emergency savings fund because, it could be that we are particularly susceptible to changes in the economy and just our work, our working life in general.
Exactly. And there are a lot more women who are self-employed, as you are and as I am. And when you still have kids at home, when they've got summer break, it's the moms pretty much that are taking care of them. And if you're self-employed, you're probably not going to be as busy by design and not making as much over the summers when your kids are home for the summer. That has an impact. And then you have normal ups and downs of your particular income. If you have, a kid that gets sick, you're the one that's staying home with your child and not working that day. And sometimes you might not be paid for that day. If you're self-employed, you're not getting paid for that day. And, other jobs you might not be getting paid. And so women are more susceptible to changes in income and levels of income than men are on average. And it just means that we do need more of that emergency fund. Plus, more and more women are single moms. And then all of the finances roll onto you, as well as the full caretaking. So it makes that volatility even more important. So if you're in those types of situations, you really want to strive for that 6 months of emergency funds. If you and your spouse are both very, very stable in your income, and everybody in your family is very healthy as well, maybe you're feeling stable financially, maybe you can go closer to that 3-month mark. And so that has an impact on it. But we have to think about not only our own personal health, when we talk about emergencies that can come up, it's the health of our spouse, it's the health of our children and our parents. And so if if mom or dad gets really ill, it's usually the daughter, more likely, not always, but more likely, that's going to help really take care of that parent. And that's time off work. And that's probably a loss of income or reduction of income associated with it. Maybe mom or dad has to move in with you. Those kinds of expenses can be very difficult to deal with, and they can be sudden. Mom or dad has a stroke and all of a sudden everything is completely changed. And so we have to be prepared because we're taking care of ourselves, our spouse, our children, and our parents at the same time.
We had a situation, my husband and I, just a few months back, where my father-in-law fell really ill and he was in the hospital, and they live in Oklahoma. We're here in San Diego in California. And so we're not close to them at all. And my husband had to basically just down tools and get on a flight and go over there. And he was there for about 2 weeks. Now, luckily, he's in with his company for many years. He has a very stable job. So that wasn't an issue for him. But let's say that was my situation where, I am self-employed, me taking 2 weeks out, unexpectedly. So not having had the chance to plan and save, that would have hit me really hard. And I think back to my days as a single parent, that would have hit me really hard. I mean, to the point where I would have been not able to cover like the basics and necessities. So yeah, I think it's great advice to say that the savings for 6 months should be the ideal for sure.
It's definitely the ideal. And again, if you've got the job stability, the health all the way around and so forth, and the financial stability, and feel comfortable with the 3 months, you can get it at that point. But if you don't, you want to be as close to 6 months as you can.
What are the common mistakes? So people are, they're very well intentioned. We're setting up our emergency savings fund, but what are the common mistakes? I can think of some immediately. With me, it would be dipping into that for things that aren't necessarily an emergency. But you tell me, what do you see people do as it relates to making mistakes in this area?
I think the number one mistake is dipping into it. And that gets into be really careful about combining your emergency fund in the same account as your regular savings fund. Because people dip into it. Everything's going fine, but something, especially when it talks about an unexpected car repair or health issue, it happens in a moment notice. A flicker And your whole life like that can change, and your financial situation can change overnight. And so that's what the number one. And then I think the number two is people feeling like I don't have enough to save. And so I'm going to wait until some point that I have more to start saving. And I think the important part, as we said, is just start saving. And once you start saving, you get it. It's a habit. You get into the habit of it. You have it automatically taken out of every paycheck and put into your emergency fund. You do what you can to reduce your expenses, and you just have a flat amount that every paycheck goes into that fund. And once you're in that savings mode and you have that habit, then it's easier for you to say, okay, well, now I think I can increase it a little bit, and just a little bit more. Every little bit helps a lot when we're talking about an emergency fund. So I think those are the two most common mistakes that people make.
In my head, I need to be very strict about what constitutes an emergency. So is the fact that, my daughter needs a private lesson at ballet because her instructor says she needs one for her ballet exam, is that an emergency, or is that something that, I would dip into my regular savings for example? So yeah, that's really good. And I'd love to hear from the audience, Lisa. I'd love to hear from you guys. How are you navigating this? Do you have an emergency savings fund? If so, have you had to use it yet? Or if you don't have one, what things have cropped up in your lives where it's been like, oh my gosh, it's this, things happen, and how have you navigated that situation? Because I know how stressful things like that can be. So I'd love to hear from you guys. Lisa, is there anything else all that you want to impart during this episode with us?
Set realistic timeline and goals, and celebrate your milestones. So if once you get 1 month of emergency savings saved up, celebrate it, because when you celebrate it, and then it just helps to keep you motivated to keep going.
But by celebrating, I guess you're not encouraging us to go wild and go to Bloomingdale's and blow like a grand on clothes. They're not that wild.
No.
Kind of defeating the object, but I get you. And I love, Lisa, that even though it's sometimes we're discussing pretty stressful topics as it relates to finances, I love how you break them down, and at the end of every session you say, celebrate your wins. And I love how you're making it really manageable for us, because there's nothing worse than feeling overwhelmed as it relates to finances. And I think that just putting things into manageable baby steps almost, and then giving yourself a pat on the back when you're sticking to your plan, I think is great. And I feel that as someone who is very much learning about finances and is on the beginning of her financial journey, that really is something that I'm going to incorporate into my learning. Just giving myself a little pat on the back, and maybe it's that latte that I would love to be having every day, but I'm being sensible now because I'm budgeting. But that type of thing, I think, really just encourages people, and it makes you want to continue. Because if everything's such a hard slog, I could see that people could get disheartened. So I love that you always encourage us to recognize our progress. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of another episode of Fearless Money Management Podcast. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your support helps us to reach even more amazing women on their journey to financial freedom. Bye for now.